Oh, that was very sudden. Hi, everyone. Anyone out there? Hi, everyone. Yay, that's better. How are you all doing today? Can I say I'm so grateful that you're all here, because when I saw that it was so sunny, I was like, we've got competition with the sun here. So many people out in the pubs, but I'm telling you now, tonight's going to be better than any pub, that is for sure. We have an incredible co-founder with us today, but before I introduce her and we start this wonderful conversation, I need to do an introduction. I don't usually introduce myself because I usually forget. So I'm going to tell you who I am. So you're like, okay, cool. I'm grounded in that. And then I'll tell you who Virgin Startup is, and then we'll get into it. And I've done my main housekeeping. So my name is Natalie. I'm the co-founder of a culture consultancy called the Future Kind Collective. But most importantly, I'm your host of Changemakers. So Changemakers is an event run by Virgin Startup, and it's all about getting incredible change-making founders and entrepreneurs to tell us a bit about their story and to learn from their journeys. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. For those of you that don't know, Virgin Startup is a not-for-profit that helps companies and startups and early-stage businesses to grow and scale, or I should say start and scale. Companies like Dash, who hopefully, not who, the drink of theirs you'll hopefully have and tried. So they've got loads of amazing companies have started through Virgin Startup. So if you do want to talk to anyone from Virgin Startup who will give you much more information than I just have, can any Virgin Startup people give us a wave? One there? And Alice? Joe's given us a wave, tentatively. Okay, so those are your people to talk to, okay? And I should mention, we're in a new location this time round. We're in Dream Factory. So I don't know, Graham, do you want to do a quick shout out to Dream Factory? So content creation for startups, it says it on the wall there. And I think it's so appropriate, this kind of sexy little setup that we're in for tonight's conversation.
It's very intimate,
isn't it? I'm like, welcome to my boudoir. So we start every one of these Changemakers by getting you all to speak to each other. And we usually try and make the icebreaker question related to the topic that we're talking about. So if we're talking about food and drink, it'll be like, what's your favorite food? Or, you know, what's the drink that gives you an energy boost? And I was like, what question to ask? What question to ask this time round? What's your favorite sex No, we're not going there. So I've decided to be a bit tame, although I'm sure the rest of this conversation won't be. I would love for you to turn to your neighbor, or if you're online, you can write it in the chat. And I'd like you to share what taboo you're trying to eradicate, or what taboo would you most like to get rid of. So we're going to be talking about taboo busting today. So I'd like to start us talking about that. So turn to the person next to you, introduce yourself, and share what taboo you're working to get rid of.
I was so worried you were going to say sexual position.
Honestly, there's so many things. I was like, how am I going to do this? I usually run through it and start. There's a lot going on. I listen to your podcast.
Yeah.
I love that. And it's not like this. Nothing to trip you up. Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? I hope you can. Really? Oh, wow. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I'll have to talk about that. Okay. Hello. Okay, everyone, if you'd like to wrap it up. Hello. Okay, maybe if I stand up. Hey, everyone. I need like an alarm or something. Hey, hey. Okay, everybody, we're going to carry on with the chat now. Can you like do like a Mexican wave of silence? Huh? Woo! Okay, that worked a bit better. Hey, in the corner, we're coming back to the conversation. This is quite mortifying, I'm not going to lie. If you're next to someone that's still talking, can you just tap them on the shoulder and like help me out? Wow. I hope that no one got that on camera, because me screaming desperately into this microphone is quite humiliating. But there we go. We're back now. I'm super intrigued about all your conversations because you really didn't want to stop talking about them, but I don't want to wait any longer to speak to Farah because I've been so excited about this conversation. And I actually made like 4 pages worth of questions, which I don't think we'll get through all of them because I'm sure you have questions as well. But I'm going to introduce Farah now and we're going to get into the conversation. So this month's Changemaker is smashing taboos left, right, and center around sex, pleasure, and sexual health. And I think this is such an important conversation to be had. And I personally am so grateful that Hanks exists and that you and Sarah created it. What started out as 2 friends venting over penis-centric messaging and poor experiences for women in the sexual health space has grown to be a sustainable sexual wellness brand stocked in over 2,000 retail stores across the UK, including Boots, Tesco's, and Sainsbury's, and more. So I'm so excited to hear about this journey and to learn from you and your experience. So can we start off with a round of applause for Farah, co-founder of Hanks? Awesome. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's so good to have you here. I'm going to try not to fangirl too much. I'm really excited to dig into how you went from a career in investment banking into sexual wellness and condoms. But before we do that, I'd really love to learn a little bit about you prior to the working world. Like, what was Farah like growing up? Was there inklings that you were going to be an entrepreneur? What were you like? Paint a bit of a picture for us.
I was an absolute chatterbox and I would constantly get told off at school for talking too much and not listening. Yeah, I mean, I'm the youngest of 4. I come from a Bangladeshi Yorkshire family. My siblings are all quite entrepreneurial and they always have been, as are my parents. So I was quite happy just never wanting to be an entrepreneur, to be honest. I was just quite happy going along with school, going down a track and going to university. But if I'm being entirely honest, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do growing up. Even when I got to A-levels, my dad wanted me to be a doctor or a dentist in true classic Asian dad form. But I just didn't want to look into people's mouths or like just be a dentist. So last minute, I actually changed track and sort of took finance modules and I ended up studying finance at university. Again, didn't really know what I wanted to do, if I'm being entirely honest, but you kind of fall into this conveyor belt of choosing a subject, going to university, etc. And then when I came out of university, I studied finance at Durham. I knew that I wanted to go in some form of finance, but I still didn't know exactly what that was. And I happened to fall into a career in investment banking. So up until that point, I will say there's a level of naivety and just seeing what experience I could get. But behind the scenes, having entrepreneurial siblings, there was always that chatter at Christmas, Easter, whenever we were together of, oh, I've seen this commercial building that's for sale and the yields on this. And have you thought about that? And Farah, have you thought about something on the side? And honestly, I was just quite content in my role my job at Goldman at the time.
So let's talk a little bit about your experience in finance. So it was 7 years that you were working in investment banking, is that right?
Yeah, so I actually graduated and then took a role in insurance for about 18 months. And that was mainly due to personal reasons. I wanted to be up north near my mum, who wasn't very well at the time. And miraculously, she was very low on the list, but had a kidney transplant. And we were told that she would never be on the transplant list or even get a transplant. So it was a real miracle. And once she'd had that kidney transplant, she was like, well, what are you doing here? Like, move on, go to London. I was quite comfortable doing that. So I looked at different roles, still within finance. I was also studying to be a chartered accountant. So I was about 18 months into that chartered accountancy track, and I hated it. I hated numbers. I hated everything around accountancy, but it felt like a good thing to have in your back pocket. And I sort of thought, let's see it through. But I applied for a number of roles. I had an offer with Chanel, Sotheby's, Goldman Sachs, and Lloyd's Banking Group. So it was a real mix. And in the end, I took the one at Goldman, and it mainly came down to the people. So I had 15 interviews there, and I've really enjoyed every single person that I met. And it felt ultimately they want to know that they can work with this person too during long hours, or, are they a good team fit? So I was there for about 7 years. I started in technology finance, and then I moved into asset management shortly after. So client-facing roles, both internally and externally.
Yeah. We'll definitely get on to how that finance background has helped you running your own business, because I'm sure there's loads of links there. But I'm really curious about your perspective on the value of having worked for someone else for a number of years before starting your own business. Because I think that my view, not to lead the witness or anything, is that there is a lot of pressure to like come out of uni, start your own business, and like figure it out whilst you're trying to figure everything else out. And that's not my journey. My journey is very similar to yours. I started out in banking for 5 years, then about 4.5 years in agency. And I'm so grateful for learning on someone else's money than figuring out how I'm going to make money whilst learning everything from scratch. Like, I wonder if you have any views on the value that experience has had.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much value in working for someone else, especially when you're coming out of university, you're 21, 22, 23, what the hell do I know about being in the corporate field and managing people? And I was really lucky. I had some amazing managers who were so good at taking the time, investing in me, coaching me, and also not taking credit, like really sharing that amongst the team. So I definitely think there's value in getting experience elsewhere. And actually, Emily, who's on our team, is here, will probably kill me for this, but there is a level of structure I probably put into working into Hanks, things that I've learned from being in finance, all the way from boring stuff to reporting to like understanding the commercials behind the business, which I think is super important in any startup.
Yeah, definitely. And I wonder whether that kind of finance acumen that you obviously had, has that kind of influenced the way in which you approach stuff like funding and things like that? Because I think sometimes there's, especially in the VC world, this narrative of like, or less of a focus on profitability and more on the kind of blitz scaling. Like, I wonder if that your background in finance has kind of influenced your view on funding.
Yeah, I'll be really honest. I thought it would be a doddle to raise investment coming from a finance background. It's not. It's been incredibly challenging. And in some ways, you would think, me being in finance and having the commercial hat on, Sarah, my co-founder, who's a gynecology doctor, specializing in sexual health, our two backgrounds blend very well, very complementary in terms of skill set. But it's been incredibly challenging, actually, fundraising. You would think having that experience, understanding commercials would make it easy. But actually, the sad reality is, and I'm sure many of you have seen this, it's incredibly challenging as a female founder to raise funds, regardless of what your background is and what expertise you have. I think it's slowly changing, but it was certainly incredibly challenging when we launched the brand 6 years ago.
Yeah. I definitely want to dig into that a little bit more, but I want to quite early on in this conversation talk about your relationship with your co-founder, Sarah. So known each other since you were 16, went to school together.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. And I would love to hear the story of how you went from best mates to co-founders and how that kind of came about.
Yeah, so Sarah and I actually went to school together up north in York. We live a village apart from each other. It's very rural up there. It's very different to London. And yeah, we met when we were 16. I had actually just joined the school that she was in, and it was over a Bunsen burner, as romantic as that sounds. We were in
Stunning
physics class, and Sarah was like, "Do you want to sit next to me?" And I was like, "Absolutely, please. I have no friends here." And we'd hit it off, and we've been such good friends since. We ended up at the same university without realizing as well. So some of you will know this, but it's incredibly difficult to get into medicine, and there are only a certain number of universities. And we were just talking in passing, and turned out we were going to the same university, Durham. We'd applied to the same college. So we spent university days together as well and lived together. It sounds very incestuous, I promise it's not. We were incredibly close. And then Sarah went on to continue with her medical degree and became a doctor and specialised in gynecology and sexual health across hospitals in both Manchester and London. So our friendship still remained even when we went into different careers. And often it's really funny, I would try and I'd leave my flat at 7 o'clock and it was a half an hour walk to the office. She'd also be walking into hospital for her 8 a.m. shift. So we'd always catch up and speak. Well, separately, she was in Manchester at the time and I was in London, but we would always catch up. So yeah, we've remained very close, and our families know each other. It's all really lovely.
That's so gorgeous.
Yeah.
I love can I just say the point that she invited you to come and sit with her? Like, I always think of like school kids as like really mean and horrible. But the fact that she invited you over, that just like makes my heart just swell. So love that, like super great friends. Clearly the universe was like trying to make something happen in those early stages. So how was Hanks born? How did that come to be?
So honestly, when I was in finance at the time, I was in a long-term relationship, and hormonal birth control was just not doing it for me. Weight gain, mood swings, you name it, I was getting all the side effects. And funnily enough, in my friendship groups, including with Sarah, certain people would be on different hormonal birth control and it'd work amazingly for them, but it wasn't for others. And it just shows that there's no one size fits all. But obviously condoms are one of the only non-hormonal forms of birth control. So it was on my busy lunch break. I knew it was sort of my turn to pick up the pack. I picked up my Boots meal deal, a deodorant, anything else that would cover this pack of red condoms. And my boss was behind me in the queue, and this was about 1 p.m. on a lunchtime, middle of the week. He's probably thinking, who is she getting up to hanky-panky with on her lunch break? I don't often go red, but I could feel the heat on my cheeks. And I was like, oh God. And that whole moment was super awkward for me and embarrassing. But that embarrassment soon turned to anger. I was thinking, wait a minute, I don't feel embarrassed to take control of any other area of my health. I could even buy bazooka that Faruka and I wouldn't be embarrassed. But when it comes to condoms, they're garishly packaged. They promote a man's conquest. As a woman, you're baffled by the choice. And I was explaining this to Sarah one afternoon, we'd had a day off. And like all good ideas, we'd had a couple of bottles of wine, right? That's where the best ideas fall.
Exactly.
There and then as well. So my dad used to say in an Indian accent when he'd drop us off into town, not knowing that we were trying to get into clubs under 18, like, no hanky-panky. So we instantly knew it had to be hanky-panky. So we called it Hanks, which is short for hanky-panky. We thought of it that night. And then we woke up with really terrible hangovers. But we were so excited at the prospect. We were so excited that no one else was doing this. We spent evenings and weekends researching the market globally, understanding what the pain points were. We surveyed 2,000 women. And at that point, we took a bit of a calculated risk, right? We really need to know that there was actually a market for this rather than think of a lovely idea, launch it, and it not be a success. So we did a lot of research to understand who would buy these products and what they want, and that's what drove us to create the first product.
I love that. I love the fact that you came up with the name on the night that you were like just talking about it as well.
Yeah.
And I feel like, how could you not have pursued that when you had such a great name? I'm like, if you've got the name, it's got to happen. So I have to admit, like, I remember the first time that I came across Hanks. It was on Instagram. It was around the time that I was coming off the Marina coil. And I was like, what am I going to do now? Like, I was like, there's no way I'm going into Boots to get condoms. So what am I going to do? Like, go to the sex clinic, come out with one of those, like, do you remember the purple bags?
Pick and mix bags.
The pick and mix bags with like a load of condoms in, and it's so mortifying. And I was like, I'm borderline an adult now. Like, how can I be going to the sex clinic? And it was like one of those serendipitous moments where I came across Hanks. The brand spoke to me. And it was warm, it was welcoming, it was human, and it was feminine, which I think, like, all of those things, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, this is for me. I know you spoke about like you did a lot of research to find out whether there's a market for this and what people actually needed. But how did that also come into the branding? Because I feel like that has really stood out, or at least it did to me when I first came across Hanks.
Thank you. Yeah, when we thought of the idea, Sarah and myself thought that we were the target market. So we were 27-ish. We were going through these pain points. So we felt like we could translate that to the brand. But ultimately, what we've always said from the start is we want to be a brand that's real and relatable, a brand that doesn't gloss over the realities of being a woman in the modern day. And they're the principles we've used even up until now. So, I mean, neither of us came from a branding background or a marketing background. So you should have seen our very first iterations. This was pre-Canva, terrible. But again, if we just kept coming back to that, what's the vision? What's the key for Hanks, and what's our messaging? And then tried to translate that across. And ultimately, when we did the survey, so we surveyed about 2,000 women, we found the key pain points formed part of the branding. So the key pain points being garishly packaged. Well, we don't want that in our branding and packaging. So we created something that aligned to beauty standards. That was something that if it was on your cabinet or your shelf, you wouldn't feel embarrassed, or people would question it. And similar to other aspects of pain points, so clean beauty, people cared about what they put in and on their bodies. They don't want nasty ingredients that cause irritations. So again, bringing that across to what our branding represents. If you look at the packaging, it's quite clean and neutral. So yeah, we tried where possible to listen to our customers. And ultimately that, you know, not only with the branding, with every product we have produced, that's always been customer led. Everything has been, what do our customers want? What do they want from us next? What do they like? What do they not like? And that sounds true for every single product up until now.
I love that so much. And I think that there's such an important learning for all of us here, especially those that are like early on in their business, like understanding your customers and getting that knowledge of what they want and need and what their pain points are, even before you have a product, is so key, because then it means you're not going to waste time, right? Like you knew your customers before you made anything, presumably. Is that right?
Yeah. Before we put our life savings into Johnny's, we had to make goddamn sure that people wanted them. So again, taking that calculated risk, we really tried to understand what they want. And then we went to manufacturer and said, this is the product we want. We need it to have no nasty chemicals or irritations. You know, it's an archaic industry that's not changed in decades. So people don't often question household brands like these, but actually there are certain ingredients that you don't need in these condoms that exist, like anesthetics, which often with a man's pleasure in mind, or spermicide. So we really turned that on its head, took that to manufacturers, and a lot of them shut the door on us because they thought we were two little girls with this crazy idea. But we managed to find someone that did believe in our vision and could actually create a product that we wanted. And do you know what's really funny as well? In addition to us thinking of this idea and getting it to live launch, I'd say it's partly serendipity, but also work. We managed to meet certain people along the journey that just helped us. Like, when we launched, we didn't have a clue what an angel investor was. I just thought of Dragon's Den, and like, turns out they're nothing like the people on Dragon's Den. And we just happened to meet people along the way at the right time that knew someone that just opened doors. And one of the things, you know, I'd met Gabby Hersham, who's the co-founder of Huckletree, speak at an event, and we caught up afterwards. And I stayed in touch with her, and it was because of Gabby that we were one of the first alpha brands on their program. So their incubator. If it wasn't for that incubator, I highly doubt we'd know what a pitch deck looks like, or how to pitch. We actually very serendipitously came across my good friend Graham. Graham was working for Startup Ban at the time, and I met Graham through Andrew, the other co-founder of Huckletree. And Graham was riding around in this speedo van. I was saying, you can't mention anything about where I work at the minute. And there's actually a video circulating of our blurred faces where we told a story, which did amazing. And then that led to us speaking to more and more people. And it's kind of full circle that we're now here in Dream Factory, which is Graham's place. Crazy.
I love that.
So yeah, it's definitely been helpful having people along the way who are willing to support the journey and help.
Have you like put yourself out there to meet those people as well? I know you said some of it was serendipitous, but I think that like networking can be seen as such. I'm not suggesting that that's the way in which you met all of these people, but like networking does have that kind of people are like, ew, not for me, but it feels like you were putting yourself out there, not just like behind a screen or whatever.
We put in so many hours into events. We would sneak into events that we weren't invited to.
I love that.
Just to try and get to the people we needed to. And the way we thought about it is we need to build our network because we don't know anyone in this startup arena. We don't know anyone in this space. We've never raised before. So we just go to any and every event. Being in a co-working space really helped, or being part of a community, a bit like Dream Factory, where you have other like-minded individuals and you can share and learn. So that definitely helped. But we were also quite strategic. So like, if I knew that I needed to raise investment, I snuck into a Bloomberg event that was just for investors, and I used my Goldman hat, and then just spoke to a bunch of people and managed to get 2 investors out of that. And even for the people that weren't interested, they knew someone that might be, whether that's for branding, packaging, getting into retailers or investments. So it's super important to put in those hours, as boring and as time consuming as that can be. But had we not put the legwork in the first 2 years, I don't think we'd be here today.
100%. I think it's so great to hear you say that and like talk about how you were quite assertive with putting yourselves in those scenarios and hustling to put yourselves in those scenarios, being like, okay, I'm not invited to this thing, but I'm going to try and get in. What's the worst that's going to happen?
Yeah, you just get kicked out, and that's fine.
And that makes a great story. So win-win. I am curious about, and I know a lot of people in the room will be curious about as well, being a product-based business, there's always a challenge with getting started, especially around funding. So I'd love to hear a bit about how you went from idea to being at a point where you can speak to a manufacturer and kind of put that first order in.
Again, a level of naivety. We just jumped straight in with our like Hotmail addresses and emailed people, and we're like, please, sir, will you make these condoms for us? And we just jumped straight in because we were like, the sooner these things take forever, and I'm super impatient, as is Sarah. And that's the one thing we've learned. Everything takes a lot longer than you think. And so we jumped straight in and spoke to as many people as we could before we even had any money to put behind it, or even, you know, brand deck. I remember bigging it up with the manufacturer. Was like, yeah, and our brand team back home will mock up everything. That was Sarah on Adobe. So we did do a bit of fake it till you make it. But speaking to people as soon as possible, and not just with product development, even with your idea. One of the things, you know, we were pretty cagey about early on is not telling people about our idea, because we were worried people would think we're silly, and then, you know, maybe we won't go through with it, or someone would steal our idea. The reality is, like, the sooner you speak to people, the quicker you get free consulting. Like, yes, everyone has ideas, but there's some great ideas there as well, and people are willing to help. And, you know, about the competitor stuff, someone copying your idea, you've just got to stay in your lane and really believe in your vision, stay true to that, and don't get distracted by that stuff.
Oh, I love that so much. Like this year, one of my and my co-founders' mantras has been less but better. And it's kind of like another way of saying stay in your lane, right? It's like you can look at all of the things that your competitors are doing and be like, oh shit, I need to do that, I need to do this, I need to do that. Or you can do what you do really, really well and focus in on your vision and make that better and better. And that then stands out much more rather than everyone looking a bit of the same because they're doing all of the same stuff.
Yeah, and the other thing is they can exist too. I know that's not what we want to say,
I
but
love that.
actually, you know, from our initial products in the condom industry, there's one key player that owns between 75 to 80%. Well, what about the other 20? Like private labels can exist and you can offer a different niche. It is okay. But try not to get distracted by it or getting one over someone. Like just really focus on your core and your niche.
That's such an important message as well. And I think like the likelihood in this room is that we're going to have a lot of people doing similar things. So you're going to meet other people that are doing similar things to you. And I think I really love the language of co-opetition rather than competition. And it's the idea of like, actually we can coexist together and we can, sometimes you can support each other. Sometimes there'll be a bit of space, but it's like, it doesn't have to be so dog eat dog all of the time. Have you found that with like similar startups or other startups that you've come across?
Yeah, I think early on in our journey, we did, and we still do, but it just doesn't affect me as much anymore.
Yeah.
And I think like I really try and protect my energy. Like work can be all consuming and I do love it, but there's very limited energy for anything else. So why waste additional energy getting pent up about other brands? I mean, early on there definitely was a few doggish moves from certain founders, but you just have to get over it. You just have to move on quickly because the time you waste on that could be time better spent on building a brand. I think the other challenge is, you know, even though we started with condoms, we've built out our proposition, which we've wanted to do very early on, but have been limited through funding, to build out a proposition that harnesses women's health all the way from their first period to their first time having sex, first child, menopause and beyond. That's a huge arena. So naturally, we're going to come up against people who may have started in period care or menopause, and there'll be overlap, which is why I think it is important to know that we can all coexist.
Yeah.
Just ideally harmoniously.
Yeah, exactly. Focus on the good eggs and, you know, the not so ones, ignore them. I would love to talk, I really want to talk about how you've diversified Hanks and how you're choosing different products and like what that vision looks like. But I guess before we move away from like the kind of building the business and getting funding, I would love to, I know that your funding journey has been pretty rough, and that's probably saying it lightly. Can you tell us, whatever you're comfortable with telling us, a bit about the realities that you faced with fundraising, either as warnings or things that you've learned from them?
So I think the landscape is very different now to what it was 6-7 years ago. It's in a better place. It's not where it needs to be, but it's in a better place. You know, when Sarah and I first thought of the idea and went to people, VCs and angels, we'd get laughed out the door because, you know, they'd be saying, what do you girls know about a male-dominated industry? Women don't buy condoms. It's a man's job. You know, people would be thinking, oh, it's adult, it's sexy. We can't, you know, VCs don't touch that. We don't deal with that. And then the fact that it's a consumer product as well is even more challenging. You know, we tried to raise in a climate where people were looking for the next Facebook or, you know, a SaaS business or something with sticky subscriptions. So it was incredibly challenging. I mean, one of the worst things, and you've probably seen this, is the reality is when we started raising, 90% of funders were men. And, you know, big majority were older men with classic views. And we'd get all sorts, like, demonstrate how to put on a condom for me. And it's just like, would you say that to your daughter? Like, it's just vile. I think things have changed since, but we were the first in UK, Europe that were talking about condoms without, you know, cringing and talking about female health in that way. So I think it was a shock factor initially for people who were in funds. Now it's become a bit easier. I do think the UK are a few years behind the US. I think we're still a little bit shy and reserved about these matters, whereas in the US you see some brands that are very much out there, have had the funding and the backing and are living that lifestyle brand and building out their vision more so than in the UK.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I can't imagine how much you would have to like big yourself up to go into some of those rooms. And like, even before you've had that experience of like people laughing you out the door or whatever, like, you know that it's going to be a hard conversation. Like, you're not going in there talking about a SaaS business or something that, like, you're talking about something that's already taboo. So honestly, like, hats off to you and Sarah for like stepping in and having that conversation. And I guess I'm curious and I'm sure a lot of people in this room, whether they've gone for funding or whether they'll go for funding at some point, there is naturally going to be a lot of rejection involved. And that's painful. Like, we don't want to, none of us want to experience any kind of rejection, especially not about your business, which is very much like, you know, a baby, or like, I'm not comparing it exactly to raising a child, but, you know, I feel like my business is my baby for now anyway. What kept you going through all of that rejection and also that misogyny that you were experiencing as well?
So it gives me there's a real fire in my belly when someone says I can't do anything or do something. So like, I remember my brother, who I love, we're super close, but when I told him about this idea about Hanks, he was like, oh my God. Also, you know, Muslim Bangladeshi background, telling your big brothers that you're going to quit your day job and sell Johnnies. You know, it's like EastEnders omnibus waiting to happen. And my brother was like, Farah, can I be honest? Like, please don't quit your job. Don't do this, because it won't fly. Like, and he said that from a loving place, from a protection place. And I was like, thanks so much, because this time next Christmas, I'm going to be sat on the same sofa with you, and we're going to have launched. And obviously he's super proud and supportive, but that, like, rejection gives me a fire in my belly. Like, someone says, no one knows your business better than you. You know what you're building. Obviously you need to know when you're flogging a dead horse as well. So you need to know there's a market for it, but you know your business better than anyone else. And I think that rejection that we've had constantly, we believe in our brand and our vision so much. You know, women's health is so underserved, even now in 2023. We really wanted to do that, to deliver for women's health and serve an underrepresented market. So I think that is what kept us going. I think also another thing, you know, my mum's an absolute trooper. Sorry to get a bit personal, but she is a feminist. She doesn't say she's a feminist, but she pretty much is. She held down like multiple jobs, raising 4 kids, like absolute hustle, like, and in such difficult conditions. And I think she's given me a lot of that resilience, and that kind of go get 'em attitude, and don't take no for an answer. So I'm not saying it's easy, but you just got to be prepared to have a few slaps and then take it as character building and move on to the next.
I love that. I love a mum shout out as well. Shout out to Farah's mum. Love that.
Thanks.
And I imagine that your relationship with Sarah as well, having a co-founder, is something that helps through those moments as well.
Yeah, I couldn't do it with anyone else. And I'm so glad I have a co-founder. If anyone is, you know, founding a business, I definitely recommend finding a co-founder, because it just helps having that support, someone to share problems with and to tackle things together. I think it helps that we're really close as well. Almost too close at times. It's like she has a husband, but she also has a work wife here. And so yeah, it definitely helps having a co-founder.
I resonate with that so much, because my co-founder is also one of my best friends. And I think that's one of our strengths, but I'm conscious that it hasn't worked out for everyone who's started as friends, then became co-founders and so on. But I would love to hear a little bit about how you and Sarah manage your friendship and then your business relationship. Like, what tips can, personally, for me and my co-founder?
So it's funny, because a lot of people say don't go into business with your friend. And, you know, I would ordinarily agree with that. But with me and Sarah, it just seems to work. I'm not saying it's all rosy all the time. You know, there are disagreements. But I think the key thing that's gotten us through is just being incredibly honest with each other. If we don't agree with something, if we're like hashing that out there and then, rather than letting things fester, and not being vocal and honest. I think that's definitely helped. I think what also helps is we come from very different career backgrounds. You know, Sarah's saving lives, delivering babies, treating STIs, you know, very fight or flight. I was, you know, in finance. I'm an Excel monkey. Like, it's slightly different. Like, but
important business though.
Yeah. But the complementary skill sets also help, because it helps us get into the roles that we needed to early on. But a lot of it was learning on the job too. And I think having that trust between co-founders is really important. And I think because we've been such good friends from a young age, the trust is already there.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm really curious as well about how, because you and Sarah are so close, I'm curious about how you build a team around you. Because I imagine, like, if you've known each other that long, I know with my co-founder, I haven't known her anywhere near as long as you and Sarah have known each other. But like sometimes we communicate without actually saying anything.
Yeah.
Or like you share a tiny bit of an idea, but the other person's got the end of it. So you don't even have to finish your sentence, like that kind of thing. And I'm sure there's lots of other examples. Like we recently increased our team. We've got from us two, we've got 2 more. And one of the things they asked us in our interview was, how are you gonna, like, how are we gonna, like, become part of a team when you're so used to working with each other? Like, how is that gonna, how's that going to pan out? And it was really interesting because it was such a good question. And I was like, yeah, you are the right people for the job because you're asking us hard questions. And it's something that I'm still learning at the moment, but I'd love to hear like how you've approached building a team around the 2 of you and kind of getting out of your kind of shared minds that I'm sure you have some of the time.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And Sarah and I do sometimes think we're telepathic. Like I will say something and then she'll finish my sentence and be like, whoa. When we've had like our very first couple of hires, they actually applied through Instagram, or they said, you guys, I remember one of our first hires, she was like, you girls look hilarious. Can I come and work for you? Which is similar to what you said that you'd had recently. But I think beyond that, when we interview, we look for cultural fit. And when I say cultural fit, like, can you work with them? If you have to do a late night, can you imagine spend time with them? And do they have a drive for the mission? They don't necessarily have to be super passionate about everything on women's health, but do they have a passion, a mission and a drive? And does that translate? And I think that's really important. I think for us in our culture, we've got a pretty flat culture. I mean, Emily might say otherwise. You can grill her afterwards. But we're also very good at stalking. So we actually stalked Emily so Emily knew about the brand before we even launched. She was working at Huckletree. And when we were mapping out our team, we were always like, you know, what roles do you need? Who do you need? We were always like, we need an Emily. Could we get an Emily? And honestly, I'm not just blowing hot air up Emily's ass, you know, but we knew what kind of people we wanted. And there are certain companies that I look at, I think that do great culture, and Huckletree is one of them. Dream Factory is one of them. Awesome people that you want to be around, that you want to, you know, relate yourselves to. And that's why Emily came from Huckletree and is with Hanks. And, you know, we even had another hire from Huckletree. So yeah, I think culture and having that flat hierarchy as well.
Yeah, so it's like accessible. It's not kind of us and them.
Yeah.
I would love to hear a little bit about, so obviously you started out with condoms, and it's been so amazing to see how you've diversified and how, you know, it was lube next, there's the contraceptive pill, there is a sex toy more recently.
We're really testing you here, aren't we?
I know. I'm like, have I done my homework? And I'd love to, like you mentioned before, you kind of touched on that it was always the plan to go beyond condoms and like really kind of spread out into sexual health, but also like that customer life cycle you mentioned a little bit there. I'd love to hear how you've approached that, how you choose like what's the right next thing to go after, and how you kind of explore the different ends of the spectrum in terms of your target customers.
Yeah. So we kind of went against the grain with a lot of the things we did with Hanks early on. So we initially thought of condoms because of the awkward anecdote bumped into our boss, but when we were developing the product range and speaking about Sarah's experience, we found actually there were so many other areas of women's health that are underserved. Even Sarah actually, you know, delivering babies as well, so full spectrum of intimate health. We found that there are other areas where they're being underserved. There's no real brand out there for them. And then there was the education point, and we were thinking, what kind of education did we get? Not just sex ed, but relationships, health, etc. And we couldn't find a space for that either. So there were things like Mumsnet, but that was for mums. Reddit, which is so vast, but like no one safe space for content, community, almost like the kind of place you would speak to your friends when you've had a drink and you can tell them about something intimate and get their advice. Like, yeah, so we knew we wanted to create a safe space for that with products and content. We just didn't know how to get there. And we obviously didn't want to run before we could walk. So we thought, start with the condoms, let's get that out. And that was probably the most difficult behavior changing product to launch with. If you think you're going into an archaic market and someone who owns 80%, they're going to dominate the market, how do you cut through that? And one of the things, another thing that we do against grain, a lot of funders and potential funders would say, you need to get into subscription and do sticky subscription and all of this good stuff. We didn't listen to that. We did have a subscription, but we focused on getting into retail. And again, this comes back to like really knowing your customers and your product. Like we know, like if you're going on a date, you're not going to go online and order your Hanks to arrive tomorrow. You're going to need it in an hour. So you're going to go to your local Boots. Like we knew retail was super important. And we invested that time early on getting into retail because it builds trust and it builds authority because you're sitting next to these big players with a stamp of approval because you're in a Boots or a Tesco's, right? And so in order for us to build other products within women's health, we had to instill a level of trust and authority. Yeah. So we really took our time with condoms and lubricants, like marking our name within the sexual health space first, building that trust, having the repeatable customers that come back to then develop the other products. In an ideal world, that would have all happened in the first 3 years, but then COVID hit. And everyone hunkered down. No one was having, well, I'm sure people were having sex, but people weren't dating. And condoms and lubes were not classed as an essential item as well, right? So all your vitamins and stuff were going through, but then the retailers are taking the other stuff. But again, listen to our customer. We were like, what do you need? What do you want? What are you struggling with? We found a lot of women actually couldn't get access to GP appointments during COVID. So they couldn't get the repeat prescription for their hormonal birth control. So there was no way of getting that other than either getting a private online GP. So quite quickly, we pivoted the business. It accelerated some of our plans, but it meant that we brought out the prescription service much sooner than we probably would have in the journey. And what we did is we built an online pharmacy where you can come online and you can buy over 20 types of birth control that you would ordinarily get from your GP, and have that dispatched same day by Hanks. So some of it was part of the plan, but parts of it were accelerated due to circumstances. And then in terms of sort of other products, we've launched a range this year. Again, we were just thinking about who was our customer. When we first launched, it was 27-year-old Olivia. That 27-year-old is now 33, 34. What is she thinking? Is she settling down? Like, has she stopped using condoms? Is she planning for a child? Like, and thinking about that same customer, we were able to recognize those key milestones of women's health, right? First time, first child, menopause, beyond. No real one-stop shop for that. You know, perfect example, Clear Blue is the only brand you can go to get a pregnancy test kit. Like, and guess what? Not everyone wants to see, you know, the picture of a cute baby on the front of a pack because you may not want to get pregnant. It's again, really relatable. So that's the way that we think about our MPD, our product development, and where we're headed. And that's why this year we launched a range of supplements focusing on pregnancy, menopause, and women's libido. And most recently a pleasure toy. And these are all things that our customers have asked for and have wanted, and we've checked with them.
Yeah, it's such a good example of like the value of constantly, like customer research is not just like when you first launch, it's constant, it never ends. And the fact that you did that in response to a kind of world event or like a external event, but that's had an impact on your customers and you still checked and found out what they need. Amazing. I love it. I'm really conscious of the fact that I'm hogging all of the questions. So I will open up in a minute, just in case you're wondering. Do I need a time check? I can't see where my time check would be.
8 minutes to 8.
Oh, so I've gone way over. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. I've got a couple of more questions, then we will open out. I am really curious about your perspective on where we are with regards to the kind of sex positive, sexual health, sexual wellness journey, movement, whatever you want to call it. You mentioned briefly before that the US is way ahead of us. I'd love to hear a bit about how it's changed since Hanks has been around, but also where have we got to go? Like, what's the kind of next phase of this journey?
Yeah, so as I alluded to before, sort of female founders, there is that funding gap. It's very prevalent. Less than a penny of every pound of VC funding actually goes to female founders. But then it's even less if you're a person of color. It's even less if you're in a taboo space where often a lot of the VCs have vice clauses that say that you can't invest in adult tobacco, that kind of stuff, and wear class as adult. So there's definitely a lot of challenges still, and not even on the funding side. We have sort of 7 out of 10 of our adverts on Facebook get banned each week because we are classed as adult health. We don't show naked bodies. We're not overly provocative, but this still happens. So it's not just on a funding level, it's on a corporate level in other arenas. We had a payment provider that cancelled on us 24 hours after launch because we're deemed as adult. So I still think there are things that need to change, but I think we're getting much better. More people are talking about it openly, about the gap and what we need to do. But what we need are people in decision-making roles who can actually act on that, who can actually put that forward and make those changes on Meta, or, funding more female founders or funding in women's health. We don't need any more mentorship. Thank you very much. We need money. So please, like Eshita, who's the founder of By Rotation, mentioned this recently as well. And it's so true. We just need to be more brutally honest about what we need. And those who are sort of greenwashing or saying that they want to back diverse founders can finally put their money where their mouth is and actually back us if they want to.
Yes to that. One more question then from me before we open up, because I'm sure there's lots of questions in the audience as well. I've actually got loads here. I've got to pick what's my final one. I would really like to, something that I was curious about when I was reflecting before this event, and also like I'm really pleased to see that we've got lots of men in the audience as well as women, and I'm really curious about the engagement that you've had from the male audience. Is that something that's growing as a customer base? Is this important? I would love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So when we launched, we obviously wanted to target an underrepresented market, which are women. But organically, we happen to have a lot of male users, and rightly so, because men do use condoms. So online, about 40 to 45% of our purchases are actually men. So we're not shying away, and often the reasons are they also want a product that is more natural. It's their partner's choice, and that's what they want to do. And also they don't want to carry something garish. So it's often a question that comes up in how do we therefore think about the brand and the product and what we develop. And it's something we're still working on, but it's really nice to hear that whilst we haven't targeted men directly, we still have a loyal base of male subscribers.
Yeah. And do you think that there's anything that men can do to kind of further support like the sex positive or a sexual health journey that we're on?
Yeah, be an ally, be open, have open communication with your partner or family members or whoever that is within reason. Sort of being an ally and having an open, an ear and listening to what people say. I think that's the most important thing, if people can actually stand up and show their support. Yeah.
Love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's open up to the audience if anyone wants to ask a question for Farah. I don't know if do we have a roaming mic? I will repeat the question. Shall I do that? Yeah. Anyone have any questions for Farah? Hi.
Hi, Farah. Hi. I think my question is, when did you know you could quit your comfortable full-time job and dive full-time into health?
I'm just going to repeat the question for the people online. Sorry to interrupt you there. So when did you know that it was ready to go full-time in the business and leave your permanent job?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's no right answer here. But a few key indicators for us was when we surveyed the 2,000 people, and the output was this. when we met a couple of people who were willing to angel invest in us before we had the product. And just speaking to a number of people and getting the consensus on whether they would buy this product. We all, being sensible about it, you need to have like a rainy day fund too, and make sure you have enough savings to support you for a number of months, especially because it takes quite some time to start companies. Everything takes a bit longer, but there's no right answer. I think you have to take a calculated risk. How long can you afford to live without a salary, basically, to plow into the business? And that's something that Sarah and I did as well, and took on that risk. Yeah.
Awesome. Next question. Hi.
Hi, Stephanie. I actually work in finance as well. Just a quick one. How easy was it or hard was it to get into retail?
So how easy or hard was it to get into retail?
Yeah, it was really hard for us initially, but once we got into the first retailer, it became a lot easier to have the conversation with the others. The reason why it was hard is because it's a category that hasn't changed in a long time. So they tend to only have 1 to 2 buy-in windows a year. Whereas if you're in like food and drink, it's much more fast paced. You might have a buy-in window every few months. It's a bit easier to get in. I think also because it's not changed in a long time, that category, the buyer's taken a risk to take on a new brand because they need to make sure it works and that there's a rate of sale there. But I would say once we got into our first major retailer, Boots, the conversation became easier with Tesco, Sainsbury's, etc.
Hi.
Follow-up question: how would you go further? Like, how do you get to that level when you have the meetings? How would you go to that meeting to get into the first retail?
So it took us about 12 to 18 months really of conversations to actually get into retail. So definitely being persistent, but not annoying. Keeping them updated on your business. So sort of every quarter, even though retailer would say, not the right fit for us, we would still periodically update them on the business. Did you know that we did this campaign recently? Or, we've launched the lubricant and our customers say X. So giving them nuggets that would keep them enticed. So regular communication, because the last thing you want to do is then reach out 9 months later and say, hey, I'm back. Can you list me? And they're like, well, you've not really invested in this relationship. I think also thinking about what would make a buyer's job easy. What kind of things would they need? They would want to know that we can hit a rate of sale, that we are popular with customers, that it would increase footfall and revenue for them. So just thinking in that mindset as to what they would want and giving them those nuggets. But it does take time, and it's just being persistent and friendly as well.
Oh my gosh, lots all at once. We'll go with you at the front and then I'll remember you two as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. I would love to know about your future plans and vision, both for Hanks and also for yourself. Do you see yourself doing this for a really long time or exiting?
So this question is about future vision.
Yeah, tricky question. So in terms of Hanks, there's definitely a key vision here. As I said, we want to cover the milestones of women's health, and we want to keep that same customer with us so that, Hanks is a site that mothers, aunts, daughters, sisters can use, and not just for product, also for education and for content. And so that's where we see Hanks going. We recently launched in the US, so there's definitely a bit of global expansion we'd like to cover with other products that we've launched this year. I think for me personally, I'm really enjoying the ride. I'm enjoying the punches and the slaps and the rejection, but I'm also enjoying all the fun we have as a team. And the thing that keeps me going is even that a Trustpilot review or a customer messaging or, someone saying your lube changed my life or helped me with my pregnancy, etc. That stuff keeps me going. It's like, okay, we're doing something right. There's a reason why we quit our jobs.
Hi.
Thanks so much for sharing your story so candidly. I wanted to know about any activities you did pre-launch, if there was anything you did to build hype or to test your branding, or just to build that group of advocates when you were actually out there.
So this question is about what you did pre-launch. Sorry.
Jump, I'm eager. Yes, so the 2,000 customers that we surveyed, they were basically our early adopters. So we would literally keep them posted on anything and everything from we're thinking about this packaging design. What do you think? Even before we'd actually gone to manufacturing. So I'd say they were our early adopters. I think every quarter we do surveys with all our customer groups, and that also informs what we're offering them. And they also feel like they're part of the journey, which really helps. So like we did a focus group for our pleasure toy Cindy that we launched in May, and the 24 people that were there were the first to receive the product as well and review it. And it's so nice. And these same customers, some of them have been with us from day one. So making them feel like they're part of the journey, being honest as a brand, and letting them in on what you're doing is something that huge brands wouldn't ordinarily do. And that's what sets you apart.
Hi.
And thank you again so much for sharing. And I really love the way you talk about kind of rolling with the punches and enjoying that as much as the highs of the business. What is one big mistake that you've made that you're really glad you made because of all the lessons you've learned?
This is a good question. So what was the big mistake you made that you're glad that you made now?
Not necessarily. I mean, I make mistakes all the time, by the way. Like that's just, you can't avoid those. And also you learn from them. Not necessarily a mistake, but I think I am a firm believer in everything happens for a reason. Call me cliche, but I think it's been a blessing that we have not had VC funding. And the reason why I say that is that if you look at the landscape 6 years ago versus now, it's very, very different. You know, companies were being funded at ridiculous valuations, being completely pumped up, but were not profitable or sustainable at all. And now we're in a crisis. You don't see VCs deploying, but they do need to deploy. So the ones they're going to deploy into are brands that are profitable. They know their financials, and they can scale sustainably. I'm not saying that wouldn't have happened with us, but I think it's been a blessing in disguise that we've been able to grow sustainably, and we know our P&L inside out. And we're in a very good financial position. So not a mistake, but learning, I'd say.
Hi.
I've got an intriguing question. How have you entered the US market? How have you done that?
So the question is, how have you entered the US market?
Yeah, so it wasn't a decision we took lightly. So we looked at the market, what we were offering, and if it was different to what already existed. And two of the key factors for us was our site visits were far stronger than UK visits. Obviously, geographical space takes in shape there. But the second thing is over 10,000 of our email subscribers were based in the US without us ever investing or advertising or selling product in the US. Again, we took a calculated risk rather than go for a full-blown US launch. We launched the entity fulfillment and operations there, but we launched online only. So people can buy from Hanks direct to consumer. We set up a US site. And again, it's a key testing bed for us to see who our customers are, what their behavior and their patterns are before going into retail, because that is a big investment out there. So it's a phased approach with the US. We've set up a new website for the US dedicated to that, and we have operations in the US. We don't have an office in the US, so most things are handled here.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for this. So you mentioned you focus on retail mainly because it was just strategical and this makes sense. Seems like you're quite big on B2C now as well, but have you tried other channels since? I guess like product types also change, like different channels, but what worked, what didn't work, like do you suggest brands going like testing as much out initially, or yeah, what do you?
It depends on the product. For us, again, trust and authority was really important. So retail was key, and equally condoms, impulse purchases. So you want to be in convenience. We have focused more on D2C more recently. And again, that also comes down to unit economics. So what is more scalable and sustainable for you? It's great if you're in loads of retailers, but you're losing money. Like you're on shelf, but you can't build a profitable business. Not that we were in that position, but we had to take a stance on how we keep our consumer on the Hanks journey, offline and online. And especially if we want to keep that customer from period, first time, first child menopause, like D2C was the move for us on that front. I think it really does depend on what your product is. They were the two main channels for us, and obviously wholesalers, but I'd class that as retail. I think it's a great channel. I think there are different ways of getting on it, and whether you fulfill it or it's handled elsewhere. But I think it's a great channel to test your audience as well.
Oh yeah, sorry.
How did you fund? How did you fund the first batch of your product?
Yeah, so Sarah and I literally put our life savings into Johnny's, like the money that we probably would have put towards, or our families would give us for like a wedding or something more important like house. We put towards that. So it was basically our own savings. And even though we had a couple of investors who were interested in investing, they were only interested if we got X amount. So the only way we were really going to prove out our business is getting the physical product there. So we had to show we had skin in the game as well.
Any other questions from online? Hi.
Hi. It's been clear that over the last 5 to 10 years, influencer marketing has been really important for consumer brands. And there's also been some predictions that that might change in the next few years. One, have you used influencer marketing as part of your strategy? And two, will you continue to do so? And if you do, or is there new predictions that you think might happen in that marketing area?
Yeah, we have done some influencer marketing. I think early on when it was just condoms and lube, it was a bit trickier to get that across. Some influencers weren't comfortable talking about sex. Now it's quite different, and we have different range of products that we can offer. I think we're in an era where people aren't fickle. If we got a Kim Kardashian to promote Hanks, she's got millions of followers, but the engagement isn't necessarily there, and the conversion, and where we see it working really well are micro influencers that are passionate about women's health already. So there's some level of authority there as well with their followers, and they're engaged. So micro influencers have definitely worked for us, but not just. I think what's also worked is consistently having the same micro influencers, so they're with us for the journey, and we don't just use them as a one-off. So when we have other product launches, it feels very authentic when they talk about the brand.
Hi.
Hi. I'd love to understand the kind of journey that you guys went on to start the brand. So, and what I mean by that is, when you launched, did you launch with a brand which was set from an identity, look and feel, packaging? Did it look like it looked now? Or did you kind of start with something that was kind of mocked up, and then you later went to, we're a professional branding agency, or you spent more money on getting some outside professional help?
We didn't have a fucking clue what we were doing when we first launched the brand. When someone said brand identity, I was like, what? Honestly, a lot of it was we thought of the logo on the night, we drew it on the back of a napkin and the name, and then the rest, I'll be really honest, we just muffled along with Adobe, or learning how to people per hour, Fiverr, anyone that would help listen to really get it to life. We made a lot of mistakes along the way, and that's probably what led us to doing correct things. I think, being honest, about year 3, we had a bunch of investors that were like, you need a brand identity, you need a brand book, you need X, Y, and Z. And we did use an amazing agency to help us with that tone of voice and vision. But when I look back from day one and what our product looks like to now, it still doesn't look that different. So I wouldn't get too bogged down on investing thousands of pounds on a brand identity unless you really need it. Yeah.
Hi, we've got a question over there.
Hi, I've got 2 questions. Firstly, from idea inception to launching, how did you build the focus group? Was it all online?
Yeah, so it was SurveyMonkey, all online, all our friends and family that would listen. And Sarah had quite a big NHS network that she could rely on.
You mentioned that the UK isn't necessarily a warm market for sexual products, as opposed to say America. Were you ever tempted to launch in a warmer market and then launch in the UK?
I think we were challenged in that Sarah and I are based here, so it was difficult, like, unless you're really on the ground. It's a bit easier for us to go into the US without being on the ground because we've built 5 years of brand loyalty and trust. But I think if we'd have started in a different market, we'd have to physically be there, and we were tied to London. No worries.
We've got a question at the back there.
How do you keep your overheads low, like supplies, staff, and that kind of thing? How do you navigate around that?
Oh, yeah, that's a tricky one too. I think staff is a difficult one because you've got to pay people what they're worth, and keep them motivated and loyal to the business. Look, we're in a sea of change here with market conditions. Everything's going up. One thing we haven't done consciously is increase our RRPs, and again, kind of tailored towards our customers. We know that there is a cost of living crisis, and that it wouldn't be the right thing to do. But what we have done with suppliers is really try to renegotiate on our unit prices. If we increase our MOQs, would they come down to X? Forward planning as well. So if we can give them a forecast for the year of what our volumes might look like, they might be willing to take a hit on ordering some of that up front so that we can save. But I think that's a constant challenge overheads, and it's being close to the numbers, but not chipping away at everything, if that makes sense.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more, maybe.
Sorry. I was wondering, like, if you could talk about your first hires and who they were, and if you, then looking back, if you hired those people.
Oh.
I'm actually doing that.
I don't know whether I should comment on your last point, but in terms of who our sort of first hires were, for us, we are a brand and we need to translate that, especially with a behavior change like we were doing at the time. So marketing was a really important hire for us. So we knew our first hire would be marketing. We were unclear as to whether that would be someone senior or junior. And in the end, we went with someone junior because we needed someone who was hungry, willing to learn, and willing to get their hands dirty. So you can hire a CMO very early on in your journey, but they'll often be paid a lot of money and not want to do the grunt work that needs to happen when you're in a startup. You have to get your hands dirty and get involved. So for us, our first key hires were junior marketeers. And then from that, mid-marketing, operations was really important as we built out retail. Yeah, but marketing was a key hire moment for us.
Awesome. I feel like we could all continue asking questions all night long, but we're going to have to wrap up the question part now. But can I just say thank you so much for your time, but also your candidness as well. It just, you really kind of painted the picture so beautifully, and I know a lot of us will take a lot away. So thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause for Farah? So I think we've got a bit of time now to mingle and, introduce yourself, meet some other founders in the space. But again, thanks Dream Factory for having us tonight. And thank you all for coming down.